Good morning. Lunch today brought to you by the amazing, delicious, mouth-watering burgers at Bulldog Burger, Lake Harbor and Ridgeland, Starkville, and Tupelo. You're listening to 105.9 The Zone ESPN. We welcome in Steve Robertson, 247 Sports Gene's page, and he joins us on the Yuengling Lager guest line. Steve, now that Chris Parson pulled the trigger for MSU and Leach, what could that mean for their recruiting class?
Well, it could mean a lot because he is not only a very talented player, he's a very high-profile player and a player that has a lot of connections, really around the recruiting footprint. He's got some, some friends that are also considering Mississippi State, so it could be a real drawing card for the class. But the main thing is expect some leadership with the recruiting efforts. He's the guy that's going to help put this class together, and he's already kind of forged some relationships with some guys that are on the Bulldog recruiting radar. So it's huge to get a player of his caliber, but also, too, a guy with his type of connections.
How many receivers do you expect them to take in this class?
I think it'll be 4 to 5. I talked to Spurrier about that really at the beginning of the year, and he says every year he kind of approaches this expecting to take 4, and he says now with the transfer portal being a thing, you can't look at it and say, well, losing 2 to graduation, because you expect to lose, a few players every year to the portal. And he says you can't recalibrate late in the process. You've got to build relationships just in case you have another need late in the deal. So I suspect it'll be 4 or 5, just kind of dependent on how much attrition you have due to the NCAA portal.
Okay. It's we're in this spot during the summer camp, fall camp, whatever you want to call it. I don't know how we call it fall camp. Anyway, that you get your first scrimmage, and I don't know, we tend to overreact just because we're excited about our teams and trying to piece something together as far as who they are, but they still have from last Saturday 2021 games to get ready, whether it's MSU or Ole Miss and so on. Now that you've had about almost 48 hours to think about what all you've heard from different people and coaches and inside the building, what's your one big takeaway from the Mississippi State football scrimmage on Saturday?
That the Mississippi State defensive line is for real. That's one thing in camp that we've noticed too. You always want a little tit for tat, right? I mean, you never want one side to dominate, but you got 4 potential NFL guys up front there, and so that's a real test for an offensive line that is kind of summing some things out. Now, the good thing is, and that's been kind of the concern maybe since the draft, is what are you going to do at left tackle? Well, the left side actually held up pretty well. And that's encouraging because, Cam Jones is a guy that now has kind of slid over to right tackle. And I suspect, even though Albert Reese has had a pretty good camp, I think maybe Cam fits a little bit better there as a veteran guy. So that guy's kind of been a Swiss Army knife for State. And so they'll get that settled. I mean, I'm not the least bit worried about that. But, when it's 1 versus 1, it's pretty competitive. But last week, the defense from Mississippi State had a really good week. I would venture to say that while it was close most days, defense won every day last week. And you expect the defense to be ahead of the offense at this point. Well, yesterday was interesting. I thought Leach really got on his offense a little bit. There were some times they were a little bit lackadaisical, I guess. And, he stopped camp and they did up downs for a while. And he goes, hey, this is not even about football. This is about you showing me you have the toughness to go out here to win. So it was supposed to be kind of an abbreviated practice, kind of getting their legs back under them after the scrimmage on Saturday. But they ended up having a much longer practice than scheduled. And that, to me, is just coaching. I mean, you got to keep guys focused. And as you mentioned, you still got about 3 weeks before you go play a game. But over the course of the next week, they're going to start selling this 2 deep, and then they'll have their mock week, before they get into game week. And, Leach is a guy that holds people accountable, and that's a big part of coaching. But I think this defense is probably maybe an undervalued attribute of the Mississippi State experience this year. I think a lot of people nationally and regionally are just kind of thinking, they'll be okay. I think this defense is going to be one of the better ones in the conference.
Okay, there were some questions on the back end of that defense and Martin Emerson leaving. What do you think they've done or can do to make you feel better about that?
I actually feel really encouraged by the secondary. I mean, you know what you have with Emmanuel Forbes. The Cameron Richardson was a guy that was really kind of trending last year as the third corner. He played the bulk of the Kentucky game after Emerson was ejected one of the first plays of the game for targeting and was outstanding. But then you go out and you get Marcus Banks. They called him Speedy Banks. He had a really good week at camp last week, and he didn't get to do a whole lot in the spring, but he has kind of shown why Nick Saban recruited him in the first place over to the University of Alabama. But the guy that keeps flashing to me, which is huge because of the position he's in, is Jackie Matthews. He's a former corner, of course, that played at West Virginia, and he's playing safety for State now. And the guy really plays fast, and not just from a foot speed point of view. This guy really diagnoses plays well. He's not out there thinking and guessing. He's not hesitating. And I think the rest of that unit back there has kind of responded to him. But they've got numbers back there, and I think the competition's been good for them. And the last couple of years, you just kind of have held your breath. When somebody throws it deep, it's because you wonder about safety play. And camp so far, I think the safeties have been, surprisingly good.
What's going well and what needs to be cleaned up from the receivers?
Yeah, that's good. They had a couple drops on Saturday, which has really not been typical in camp. They've actually done a really good job catching the football. And, there's some people with a lot of snaps under their belt in this unit that 2 years ago you were kind of throwing to the wolves and hoping for the best. Well, and now they've matured and they're juniors. And so I like the group. I think Rufus Harvey has been really good, and he's a local hero. So a lot of people were, maybe thinking with their hearts rather than their heads. But the reality of it is he's kind of shown that he belongs here. Jaden Wally is State's most explosive receiver, and I think Jaden's had a good camp. And you know what you're going to get from Austin Williams. But when you begin to think about Jordan Mosley, who has quietly put together a great camp, he entered the fall running third at his position. I think he's up to second now. I think he is probably the one guy that maybe most people don't know that they probably should. Ra-Ra's had a good camp, but then there's Jordan Mosley, kind of quietly every day just kind of going about his business, and you look up within the practice and like, this guy got 2-3 touchdowns, he's a guy that gets open and, signed with Northwestern. He was a former Tennessee commitment. Then they had the coaching change up there and didn't have any real relationships with the guys that were coming in. And so he elected to look somewhere else, went to Northwestern for a year and hit the portal. Now he's back in the SEC. But he's quietly had a really good camp, and Justin Robinson has trimmed up a little bit from the spring, and Mike Leach has singled him out a couple times in his post-practice comments as a guy that they believe can be a real weapon for him.
Okay. What has to happen in the next 3 weeks for this Mississippi State team to do what they want to do? I've got about 30 seconds.
Well, they're running the football with a little more authority, and that's encouraging. I know a lot of Bulldog fans are hoping to have a little more balance. Never going to be balanced under Mike Leach. It's always going to be pass happy, but they got to continue that. I think this offensive line's got to gel a little bit. I think the defense is pretty close to being game ready, but got to get that offensive line just kind of settled and develop some chemistry. But, again, I think it's going to be a good year for Mississippi State. How good remains to be seen.
Steve Robertson with the Boneyard Podcast, 247 Sports, Gene's page, and he joined us on the Yuengling Lager guest line as Mike Leach was not happy with his offense on Sunday. And instead of a walkthrough, they got a little conditioning infused in them. And so Mike's not going to put up with going through the motions, so to speak. The show is brought to you by Edwin Watts Golf Shop on County Line Road. Go there before you go to Dancing Rabbit Golf Club. SEC Insider Hit coming up next.